The invitation felt like a slap. Cream cardstock, gold lettering, Ethan's name printed next to hers. The heiress who had everything Lena never could offer. 5 years of her life, discarded for a trust fund and a better last name. She should burn it. She should forget. But standing in her cramped studio, uniform still reeking of kitchen grease, Lena felt something crack open inside her chest. Not heartbreak. Rage. The kind that doesn't fade with time or tears. The kind that demands an answer. She had been invisible for too long. If you want to see how far this story goes, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city below. Let's see where you're watching from. The subway ride home always felt longer on Tuesday nights. Lena gripped the pole as the train lurched through the tunnel, her reflection warped in the scratched window across from her. Dark circles under her eyes. Hair pulled back so tight it gave her a headache. The black button-down she wore for work had a stain near the collar she couldn't quite scrub out. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman running on fumes, held together by spite and cheap coffee. The invitation sat in her bag like a stone. She'd found it wedged in her mailbox that morning, half hidden behind a Con Ed bill and a flyer for discount pizza. For a moment, she thought it was a mistake, some clerical error. Ethan Cole wouldn't invite her to his wedding. Ethan Cole had made it abundantly clear 2 years ago that she no longer existed in his world. But there it was. Her name, printed in elegant script beneath his. Mr. Ethan Cole and Miss Victoria Harrington. Request the honor of your presence. She'd read it 3 times before the words stopped feeling like a punchline. The train screeched to a halt at her stop. Lena shouldered her way through the crush of commuters and climbed the stairs into the cold November air. The city smelled like exhaust and roasting chestnuts. She pulled her coat tighter and started the 6-block walk to her building, a pre-war walk-up in a neighborhood the real estate listings called emerging, and everyone else called cheap. Her phone buzzed, a text from Jess, her coworker. "You okay? You looked like death tonight." Lena typed back a thumbs-up emoji and shoved the phone in her pocket. She wasn't okay. She hadn't been okay in a long time, but you didn't get to fall apart when you were one missed shift away from eviction. You smiled, you said, "Yes, chef." You carried plates until your feet bled, and you pretended the weight of your own life wasn't crushing you into powder. Inside her apartment, she dropped her bag on the floor and kicked off her shoes. The space was small, barely 400 square feet, but it was hers. A futon that doubled as a couch, a kitchenette with 2 working burners, a bathroom where the shower only ran hot if you jiggled the handle just right. She'd lived in worse. She pulled the invitation out and set it on the counter. Ethan Cole. The name still did something to her, even now. Not love. She'd burned through that a long time ago. But something rawer, sharper. They'd met in college, NYU, her on a partial scholarship that barely covered books, him coasting on family money and easy charm. He'd been pre-law, confident in that way people are when they've never had to worry about anything real. She'd been an English major with vague dreams of writing something that mattered. He told her she was brilliant. She believed him. 5 years. 5 years of late-night diners and borrowed textbooks and his promises that things would get better once he finished school, once he passed the bar, once his family came around. 5 years of being the girl he loved in private and never quite introduced at family dinners. And then Victoria Harrington walked into his life. Old money, prep school pedigree, the kind of blonde that looked expensive even in sweatpants. Within 6 months, Ethan had ended things with Lena over coffee, his voice calm and reasonable, like he was negotiating a contract. "You have to understand," he'd said, "this is about my future, my family's expectations. It's not personal." It felt pretty damn personal. She poured herself a glass of water and sat on the futon, staring at the invitation. The wedding was in 3 weeks, black tie. The Plaza Hotel. Of course it was the Plaza. Victoria Harrington probably had her dress custom-made in Paris. Lena had $73 in her checking account. She shouldn't go, she knew that. Going would be masochistic, pointless. A form of self-harm dressed up as closure. But the idea of not going felt worse, because not going meant Ethan won. It meant she stayed invisible. It meant every choice she'd made, every late shift, every ramen dinner, every moment she'd convinced herself she was fine, had been for nothing. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her landlord, rent's due Friday. No extensions this month. She set the phone down and pressed her palms against her eyes. This was her life. This was what she'd built after Ethan. A job that paid just enough to keep her afloat, a boss who screamed at her in French, coworkers who stole tips, and a future that looked exactly like her present, stretching out until she was too old to carry trays anymore. She thought about the invitation again, about walking into that ballroom and watching Ethan marry someone else, about the pity in people's eyes when they recognized her, if they recognized her at all. She'd be the ghost at the feast, the cautionary tale, the girl who wasn't good enough. Unless. The thought came suddenly, unbidden. Unless she wasn't that girl anymore. She stood and walked to the mirror hanging by the door. Her reflection stared back, tired and small. But underneath the exhaustion, there was still something there. Something Ethan had seen once, before he decided it wasn't worth keeping. She could change that. She could become someone he didn't recognize. Someone untouchable. The idea was insane. She had no money, no connections, no way to pull off the kind of transformation that would make Ethan Cole regret every choice he'd ever made. But the thought lodged itself in her chest anyway, stubborn and sharp. She went to bed that night with the invitation on her nightstand, and when she closed her eyes, she didn't see Ethan's face. She saw her own, different, stronger, someone she didn't recognize yet but wanted to become. Oh, Wednesday started the same way every day did. An alarm at 5:30, instant coffee, and the subway ride to Aurelius, the restaurant where she'd worked for the past 18 months. Aurelius was the kind of place that showed up in magazine spreads and celebrity Instagram posts. White tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, a wine list that cost more than Lena's monthly rent. She'd gotten the job through sheer luck. A friend of a friend who knew someone in HR and had spent every shift since trying not to screw it up. The kitchen was already chaos when she arrived. Chef Marchand was screaming at one of the line cooks in rapid-fire French, his face red, his hands gesturing wildly. Lena slipped past him and tied on her apron, nodding at Jess, who was polishing wine glasses with the blank expression of someone who'd stopped caring years ago. "Big night," Jess said without looking up. "Private event. Some finance guy rented out the back room." Lena's stomach sank. Private events meant long hours, difficult guests, and tips that rarely made up for the hassle. But she nodded and grabbed her notepad. The shift blurred together the way they always did. Orders, plates, refills, smiles that didn't reach her eyes. By 8 o'clock, her feet were screaming and her head was pounding, but the private party hadn't even started yet. The guests began arriving at 8:30. Lena caught glimpses of them as she worked. Men in suits that cost more than her car, women dripping in jewelry, everyone moving with the easy confidence of people who'd never had to think about money. She kept her head down and focused on her section, refilling water glasses and clearing plates with the invisible efficiency of good service. And then she saw him. He was seated alone at a table near the window, his back to the room. Dark suit, dark hair, posture so still he looked like a statue. There was something about him that made her pause. Something in the way he held himself, like he was observing the room rather than participating in it. Jess appeared at her elbow. "That's your table? Good luck." Lena frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Adrian Voss. He's a regular, doesn't talk, doesn't smile, tips exactly 20% every time. Creepy as hell." Lena glanced at the man again. He hadn't moved. She took a breath and walked over, notepad in hand. "Good evening. Can I start you with something to drink?" He didn't look at her immediately. Instead, he finished reading whatever was on his phone, set it down with deliberate care, and then raised his eyes. The impact was immediate. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense. His face was too sharp, his expression too cold. But there was something magnetic about him, something that made her skin prickle with awareness. His eyes were dark, almost black, and when they focused on her, she felt like he was seeing through her, past the uniform and the tired smile straight into the mess underneath. "Water," he said. His voice was low, controlled. "Still, no ice." "Of course, I'll be right back." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "You're exhausted." She froze, turned back. "Excuse me?" He was watching her with that same unreadable expression. "You're exhausted, and you're angry." Her heart kicked in her chest. "I'm fine." "You're not." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers. "But you're pretending. That's admirable." She didn't know what to say. This wasn't how guests talked to staff. This wasn't how anyone talked to her. "I'll get your water," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. She walked away, her pulse racing. What the hell was that? She filled a glass from the filtered pitcher, her hands shaking slightly. Jess was right. He was creepy. Too observant. Too calm. Like he knew things he shouldn't. When she brought the water back, he was writing something in a leather notebook. He didn't look up as she set the glass down. "Can I get you anything else?" "Not yet." She turned to leave again, but he spoke without lifting his eyes from the page. "What would you do if you could start over?" She stopped. "What?" Now he looked at her. "If you could erase the last 5 years and start again, what would you do differently?" Her throat tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." The certainty in his voice made her chest ache. She wanted to walk away. She should walk away, but instead she heard herself say, "Everything." He nodded, like she'd confirmed something. "Good. That's honest." "Why are you asking me this?" "Because I think you're wasting your potential." He closed the notebook and slid it aside. "And I think you know it." She should have been offended. She should have reported him to her manager for being inappropriate. But instead, she felt something shift inside her, a crack in the armor she'd been wearing for 2 years. "I have to get back to work," she said quietly. "Of course." He picked up his water glass. "But if you change your mind, I'll be here." She didn't ask what he meant. She just walked away, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. The rest of the night passed in a haze. Lena moved through her section on autopilot, refilling glasses and clearing plates while her mind spun in circles. Adrian Voss didn't ask for anything else. He sat at his table, silent and still, until the event ended and the guests began to filter out. By the time she finished her closing duties, it was nearly midnight. Her feet throbbed. Her back ached. She untied her apron and grabbed her coat from the break room, ready to collapse into bed and forget this entire day. But when she stepped into the dining room, Adrian was still there. He was standing by the window now, hands in his pockets, looking out at the street. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "You're still here," she said, surprised. "I was waiting for you." Her pulse jumped. "Why?" He stepped closer, and she caught the faint scent of expensive cologne, something dark and woody. "Because I meant what I said earlier. You're wasting your potential." "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough." His gaze was steady, unflinching. "I know you're working yourself to death in a job that doesn't value you. I know you're angry at someone, an ex probably. I know you want more than this, but you don't know how to get it." She swallowed hard. "That's a lot of assumptions. Am I wrong?" She wanted to say yes. She wanted to tell him to go to hell. But the truth sat heavy in her chest, and she couldn't push it down anymore. "No," she said quietly. "You're not wrong." He nodded, like he'd expected as much. "Then let me make you an offer." "An offer?" "A way out." He pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out to her. "I can give you what you're looking for: power, security, a new identity. And if you want it, revenge." She stared at the card. Black, with silver lettering. A name, a number, nothing else. "Why would you do that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I see potential in you. And because I need someone like you." "For what?" "For a partnership." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Come to this address tomorrow at 7. We'll talk. If you're not interested, you'll never hear from me again." He set the card on the table between them and walked past her, his footsteps echoing in the empty dining room. Lena stood there for a long time, staring at the card. A way out. She picked it up and slipped it into her pocket. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, turning Adrian's words over in her mind. Power, security, revenge. They were the things she'd been craving without knowing it, the things she'd convinced herself didn't matter because they were out of reach. But what if they weren't? By the time the sun came up, she'd made her decision. She got dressed carefully, choosing the one decent outfit she owned. A black dress she'd bought for a job interview years ago, paired with heels she rarely wore. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not Lena Brooks, exhausted waitress. Someone else. Someone harder. The address on the card led her to a building in Tribeca, all glass and steel and understated wealth. The doorman didn't ask questions, just nodded her toward the elevator. She rode it to the top floor, her heart hammering in her chest. The elevator doors opened directly into a penthouse. It was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, sleek modern furniture, art that probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime. And standing in the center of it all, dressed in a charcoal suit, was Adrian Voss. "You came," he said. "I almost didn't." "But you did. That's what matters." He gestured toward the couch. "Sit. We have a lot to discuss." She sat, her hands folded in her lap, trying to look more confident than she felt. Adrian poured 2 glasses of something amber and handed her one. "Do you know who I am?" "No." "I own things, companies, properties, people, in a sense." He took a sip of his drink. "I operate in spaces most people don't see, and I'm very good at what I do." "Which is?" "Control." He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "I control outcomes. I control narratives. And right now I need someone I can control, but who can also think for themselves." "Why me?" "Because you're desperate. And desperate people are useful." He set his glass down and leaned forward slightly. "But more than that, you're angry. Anger is a better motivator than fear. And I think, given the right resources, you could be extraordinary." She took a sip of her drink, the burn steadying her nerves. "What do you want from me?" "A partnership. A marriage, to be specific." She almost choked. "What?" "Not a real one, a contract. You become my wife in name. In exchange, I give you everything you need. Money, status, protection. And when the time comes, I'll help you destroy whoever hurt you." "Why would you do that?" "Because I need a wife. For appearances. My business requires a certain image, and being unmarried raises questions I'd rather not answer. You need a way out of your current life. It's mutually beneficial." She stared at him, her mind racing. "This is insane." "It's practical." He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "You have nothing to lose, Lena, and everything to gain." She set her glass down with shaking hands. "I don't even know you." "You'll learn. And if I say no, then you go back to your life, and in 3 weeks you watch your ex marry someone else. You smile, you pretend it doesn't hurt, and you spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been different." His eyes locked on hers. "Or you say yes, and you become someone he'll never forget." The silence stretched between them. Lena thought about the invitation, about Ethan's face when he'd told her she wasn't enough, about every humiliation, every compromise, every moment she'd swallowed her pride just to survive. And then she thought about walking into that ballroom as someone else, someone powerful, someone untouchable. She met Adrian's gaze. "What do I have to do?" His mouth curved into the faintest smile. "Sign here." The contract was 12 pages long. Lena sat at Adrian's glass dining table, the document spread in front of her like a test she hadn't studied for. The words blurred together, clauses about public appearances, financial arrangements, termination conditions. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to press them flat against the table to make them stop. "Take your time," Adrian said. He was standing by the window, his back to her, looking out at the city like he had all the time in the world. "This says I can't discuss the arrangement with anyone." "Correct. Ever. It protects both of us. Discretion is non-negotiable." She scanned further down the page. "And this part about public conduct, what does that mean exactly?" He turned to face her. "It means when we're in public, you act like my wife, appropriately affectionate, supportive, convincing." "And in private?" "In private, you can be whoever you want. We'll have separate rooms, separate lives, for the most part. I'm not asking you to pretend when no one's watching." She looked back down at the contract. The compensation section made her stomach flip. A monthly allowance that was more than she made in 6 months. Full access to a shared account for expenses. A penthouse apartment in his building, hers to keep even after the arrangement ended. "This is too much," she said quietly. "It's what you're worth." "You don't know what I'm worth." "I know you're willing to sit here and consider this instead of running away screaming. That tells me enough." He moved closer, pulling out the chair across from her and sitting down. "You think this is charity. It's not. I need someone intelligent enough to navigate my world, desperate enough to commit fully, and angry enough to sell it. You check every box. She met his eyes. What if I can't do it? What if I screw this up? Then we dissolve the arrangement and you walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else, but you won't screw it up. How do you know? Because you have too much to prove. He leaned back in his chair. The ex-boyfriend, the wedding invitation, you didn't tell me about him, but you didn't have to. I saw it on your face the moment I mentioned revenge. Her jaw tightened. I don't want to talk about him. You don't have to, but you need to understand something. This only works if you want it badly enough. If you're doing this to prove something to him, to yourself, to the world, then you'll commit. You'll become the person you need to be. But if you're here because you think I'm going to rescue you, you should leave now. The words stung, but they were true. She wasn't here to be saved. She was here because she was tired of being the girl who got left behind. The girl who wasn't good enough. The girl who disappeared into the background while everyone else lived the lives they wanted. She picked up the pen. Where do I sign? Adrian slid the contract toward her and pointed to the line at the bottom of the final page. She signed her name, Lena Marie Brooks, in handwriting that looked nothing like her own. Too shaky, too uncertain. He signed beneath her signature, his movements precise and controlled. Then he gathered the pages, tapped them against the table to align them, and set them aside. Done, he said. That's it? That's it. You're mine now. The word sent a shiver down her spine. Not fear exactly. Something else. Something she didn't have a name for. So what happens next? She asked. Next, you quit your job. Today. I'll have someone pack up your apartment and move your things here by tomorrow. You'll meet with my stylist on Friday. We need to update your wardrobe. And then we get married. She blinked. When? Monday. Monday. That's 4 days from now. Is that a problem? Don't people usually plan weddings for months? People who care about weddings do. We don't. It'll be a civil ceremony. My lawyer, a witness, 10 minutes at City Hall. Simple. Simple. Right. Because this was all just a transaction. A business deal with signatures and terms, and no room for anything messy or real. Should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt hollow. Adrian stood and walked to a cabinet near the window, pulling out a small black box. He came back and set it on the table in front of her. Open it. She hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside was a ring, a diamond so large it looked obscene, set in platinum that caught the light like ice. I can't wear this, she said immediately. You have to. People will expect it. It's too much. It's exactly enough. He took the ring from the box and held it out to her. Give me your hand. She extended her left hand, and he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. He'd probably guessed her size just by looking at her. The weight of it felt wrong, foreign, like she was wearing someone else's life. How does it feel? He asked. Heavy. You'll get used to it. She wasn't sure she wanted to. Adrian checked his watch. You should go to the restaurant now. Give your notice. I'll have a car waiting downstairs to bring you back here when you're done. She stood, her legs unsteady beneath her. This was happening. This was actually happening. Adrian, she said, and he looked at her. Why me? Really? There have to be 1,000 women in this city who would do this for you. Women who already know how to be in your world. Why choose someone like me? He was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes searching her face. Then he said, because the women in my world would see this as an opportunity. You see it as a necessity. That makes you more dangerous, and I need someone dangerous. She didn't know what to say to that. He walked her to the elevator, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, a gesture that felt practiced, like he was already preparing for the performance they'd have to give. The doors opened and she stepped inside. Lena, he said, and she turned. Don't look back. Whatever happens next, you're not that person anymore. Understand? She nodded, even though she didn't understand anything. The elevator doors closed, and she was alone with her reflection and the ring that glittered on her finger like a promise, or a trap. The restaurant was in full prep mode when she arrived, the kitchen alive with the clang of pots and the shouts of line cooks getting ready for the dinner rush. Lena found Jess in the break room, scrolling through her phone with a half-eaten sandwich in front of her. Hey, Jess said, looking up. You're early. Shift doesn't start for another hour. I know. I need to talk to Marchand. Jess raised an eyebrow. Good luck with that. He's in a mood today. Lena found the chef in his office, a cramped space that smelled like cigarettes and stress. He looked up from his laptop when she knocked, his expression already irritated. What is it, Brooks? I'm busy. I'm quitting. He blinked. What? I'm giving my notice. Today's my last day. Marchand leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. You're serious? Yes. Why? You get a better offer somewhere else? Something like that. He studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. Fine. Leave your apron and keys with Jess. I'll have your final check ready by the end of the week. She'd expected more resistance, maybe even anger, but Marchand just looked tired, like she was one more problem on a long list of problems he didn't have the energy to care about. Thanks, she said quietly. Don't thank me. You were decent at your job. Could have been better if you'd cared more, but decent. He turned back to his laptop. Good luck with whatever you're doing next. She left the office feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Jess was waiting in the hallway, arms crossed. You're really leaving? Yeah. Where are you going? Lena thought about the contract, the ring, the man waiting for her in a penthouse across town. Somewhere else. Jess frowned. That's cryptic as hell. I know, I'm sorry, I can't explain it. Did you win the lottery or something? Or something? Jess shook her head, but there was a small smile on her face. Well, good for you. This place sucks anyway. Go live your best life or whatever. Lena hugged her, quick and impulsive, and Jess laughed and hugged her back. When she pulled away, Lena felt the sting of tears and blinked them back. Take care of yourself, Jess said. You too. She left the restaurant and found the car Adrian had promised waiting at the curb, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. The driver opened his door for her without a word, and she slid into the back seat, feeling like an imposter in someone else's movie. The ride back to Tribeca was quiet. Lena stared out the window at the city she'd lived in for 6 years, wondering how much of it she'd actually seen. She'd been so focused on surviving that she'd never had time to notice the details, the way the light hit the buildings at dusk, the rhythm of the crowds, the endless pulse of life happening all around her. She looked down at the ring on her finger and turned it slowly, watching the facets catch the light. This was real. She'd signed the contract. She'd quit her job. There was no going back now. When the car pulled up to Adrian's building, the doorman greeted her by name. Welcome back, Mrs. Voss. She froze. I'm not... But he was already holding the door open, his expression polite and professional, and she realized this was part of it. The performance had already started. She smiled, tight, uncertain, and walked inside. Adrian was waiting for her in the penthouse, a garment bag draped over one arm. How did it go? He asked. Fine. Easy. He didn't care. Good. That makes things simpler. He held out the garment bag. This is for tonight. Tonight? Dinner. There's someone I need you to meet. Her stomach dropped. Already? The sooner you start, the sooner you'll adjust. Put this on. We leave in an hour. She took the bag and went to the guest room he'd shown her earlier, a space so immaculate it looked like no one had ever slept there. She unzipped the bag and pulled out a dress. It was black, sleek, with a neckline that dipped lower than anything she'd ever worn. The fabric felt like water in her hands. She put it on and stared at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't Lena Brooks. She was sharper, more polished, more dangerous. The dress fit her like it had been made for her body, and maybe it had. Adrian seemed like the kind of man who thought of everything. She tried on the heels that came with the dress, black stilettos that added 3 inches to her height, and practiced walking in them until she didn't feel like a child playing dress-up. When she came out, Adrian was waiting by the door, dressed in a dark suit that made him look even more severe than usual. His eyes moved over her, clinical and assessing. Better, he said. That's it? Just better? What do you want me to say? That you look beautiful? He stepped closer, adjusting the thin strap on her shoulder with careful fingers. You do, but beauty isn't the goal, presence is. And you have that now. She didn't know if it was a compliment or an observation. The restaurant he took her to was the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu. Dim lighting, white tablecloths, a pianist playing something soft and forgettable in the corner. The host recognized Adrian immediately and led them to a private table in the back. "Who are we meeting?" Lena asked as they sat down. "A business associate. His name is Richard Hale. He runs a private equity firm and has a wife who loves to talk. You'll charm her. She'll spread the word that I'm married, and by tomorrow, everyone who matters will know." "What if I can't charm her?" "You will. Just be yourself, but better." She didn't know what that meant, but before she could ask, a couple appeared at the table. The man was in his 50s, broad-shouldered and confident, with silver hair and a smile that looked expensive. The woman beside him was younger, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a designer dress that screamed money. "Adrian," Richard said, extending a hand. "Good to see you." Adrian stood and shook his hand, then gestured to Lena. "Richard, Claire, I'd like you to meet my wife." "Lena." The word hung in the air like a bomb. Claire's eyes went wide. "Your wife? Since when?" "Recently," Adrian said smoothly, pulling out Lena's chair as she stood. "We've been keeping it quiet." Lena extended her hand and Claire took it, her grip firm and assessing. "Well, this is a surprise. Adrian's always been so private." "I convinced him to make an exception," Lena said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. Richard laughed. "I like her already. She's got guts." They sat down, and the waiter appeared with menus and wine. Lena ordered something she couldn't pronounce and hoped it wouldn't be terrible. Claire leaned forward, her eyes bright with curiosity. "So Lena, tell me everything. How did you two meet?" Lena glanced at Adrian, who was watching her with that same unreadable expression. He wasn't going to help her. This was a test. She took a breath and smiled. "At a restaurant. I was working. He was dining alone. We started talking, and, well, it went from there." "How romantic," Claire said, though her tone suggested she didn't quite believe it. "And what do you do?" "For work, I mean." "I'm transitioning," Lena said carefully. "Exploring new opportunities." "She's being modest," Adrian said, his hand finding hers on the table. His fingers were cool, his grip firm. "Lena has a background in hospitality, but she's more interested in philanthropy now. We've been discussing a few projects." It was a lie, but it sounded believable. Lena nodded along, her heart hammering in her chest. The dinner passed in a blur of small talk and careful smiles. Claire asked questions, so many questions, and Lena answered them as best she could, letting Adrian fill in the gaps when she faltered. Richard talked about business and golf and a vacation house in the Hamptons. The food arrived and disappeared, and Lena barely tasted any of it. By the time dessert came, her face hurt from smiling. "We should do this again," Claire said as they stood to leave. "Maybe a double date at our place?" "We'd love that," Adrian said, shaking Richard's hand again. Claire hugged Lena, quick and perfunctory, and leaned in close. "You're good for him," she whispered. "I can tell." Lena didn't know what to say to that, so she just smiled and nodded. In the car on the way back, Adrian was silent. Lena stared out the window, her hands folded in her lap. "Did I do okay?" she asked finally. "You did fine." "Just fine?" He glanced at her. "You were nervous, that's normal. But you didn't fall apart, and you didn't say anything that would raise suspicions. That's all that matters." She looked down at her hands. "Claire didn't believe me. I could tell. Claire doesn't believe anything unless it benefits her. But she'll talk, and that's what we need." He paused. "You're overthinking this. It was one dinner. There will be more, and they'll get easier." "What if they don't?" "Then you'll fake it until they do." She wanted to argue, but she was too tired. The adrenaline from the evening was wearing off, leaving her hollow and shaky. When they got back to the penthouse, Adrian poured her a drink, something amber and strong, and handed it to her without a word. She took it and drank, the burn grounding her. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be long." She set the glass down and turned to go, but his voice stopped her. "Lena." She looked back. "You did well tonight, better than I expected." It wasn't much, but it was something. She nodded and went to her room, closing the door behind her. The bed was enormous, the sheets soft and cold. She lay down without bothering to change out of the dress and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere across the city, Ethan Cole was living his life, oblivious to the fact that she'd just signed her name to a contract that would change everything. In 3 weeks, she'd walk into his wedding as someone he wouldn't recognize. The thought should have felt satisfying. Instead, it just felt strange. She closed her eyes and let the exhaustion pull her under. The next few days were a whirlwind. Friday morning, a woman named Margot arrived at the penthouse with an assistant and enough garment bags to fill a small boutique. She was tall, elegant, with gray hair cut into a sharp bob and an accent Lena couldn't place. "Strip," Margot said without preamble. Lena blinked. "Excuse me?" "I need to see what I'm working with. Strip down to your undergarments." Lena looked at Adrian, who was sitting on the couch with his laptop, completely unbothered. "She's the best in the city," he said without looking up. "Do what she says." Lena stripped down to her bra and underwear, feeling exposed and ridiculous. Margot circled her like a predator, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Good bone structure. Decent posture, though you slouch when you're nervous. We'll fix that. Skin's a little dull, but nothing a facial can't handle. Hair's a disaster, but that's expected." She snapped her fingers at her assistant. "Start with evening wear. Cocktail dresses, gowns. Nothing too trendy. Classic, elegant. She needs to look expensive, not desperate." The assistant began pulling dresses from the garment bags, and for the next 3 hours, Lena tried on outfit after outfit while Margot critiqued every detail. Too tight, too loose, wrong color, wrong cut. The woman was relentless, but by the end of it, there was a pile of approved clothing that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. "Better," Margot said finally. "Now let's talk about hair and makeup." She gestured to a chair and Lena sat. Margot ran her fingers through Lena's hair, frowning. "When's the last time you had this cut?" "I don't know. A year ago?" Margot winced. "We're starting over. I'll send you to my stylist tomorrow. As for makeup, you have decent features, but you're not playing them up. I'll teach you the basics, but you'll need to practice." She pulled out a makeup kit and went to work, her movements quick and efficient. Lena watched in the mirror as her face transformed, contoured, highlighted, polished, until she looked like someone who belonged in Adrian's world. "There," Margot said, stepping back. "That's the foundation. Build from here." Lena stared at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, beautiful, composed, untouchable. "Thank you," she said quietly. Margot softened slightly. "You're not the first woman Adrian's brought to me, but you're the first one who looks like she actually wants to be here. That'll make this easier." She packed up her things and left, and Lena was alone with Adrian again. "What did she mean by that?" Lena asked. "About other women?" Adrian didn't look up from his laptop. "She's dressed women I've been seen with. None of them mattered. And I do? You're my wife. Of course you matter." It was a clinical answer, devoid of warmth, but Lena didn't push. She was starting to understand that Adrian didn't operate on emotion. He operated on strategy, on outcomes, on control. Saturday was the hair appointment. Margot's stylist was a man named Paolo, who took one look at Lena's hair and sighed dramatically. "What have you been doing to this?" he asked, running his hands through it. "Living my life?" "Badly, apparently." He spun her chair toward the mirror. "We're going shorter, sharper, something that says power, not poverty." 3 hours later, Lena had a sleek, shoulder-length cut with subtle layers that framed her face. Paolo styled it with a straightener until it looked like glass. "There," he said, pleased. "Now you look like someone worth noticing." She barely recognized herself. Sunday, Adrian took her to his lawyer's office to review the prenuptial agreement. It was even more detailed than the original contract. Pages of clauses about assets, liabilities, what would happen if the arrangement ended. Lena signed where she was told, her hand cramping by the time she finished. "You're all set," the lawyer said, gathering the papers. "Congratulations." It didn't feel like something worth congratulating. Monday morning arrived faster than she expected. Lena woke early, her stomach a knot of nerves. She put on the dress Margot had chosen for the ceremony, a simple cream sheath with a high neckline, elegant and understated. She did her makeup the way she'd been taught, her hands shaking only slightly. When she came out, Adrian was waiting in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. "Ready?" he asked. "No." "Good. That's honest." He offered his arm. "Let's go." The ceremony at City Hall was exactly what he'd promised. Quick, clinical, transactional. Adrian's lawyer stood as one witness. A clerk Adrian clearly knew stood as the other. The officiant read the vows in a monotone, and they repeated the words like lines from a script. I do, Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. I do, Adrian said, steady and sure. The officiant pronounced them married, and Adrian kissed her, a brief press of lips that felt more like a signature than anything romantic. And just like that, she was Lena Voss. They signed the marriage certificate, shook hands with the officiant, and walked out into the November sunlight. Adrian's driver was waiting at the curb. That's it? Lena asked as they got into the car. That's it. You're officially my wife. She looked down at the rings on her finger, the engagement ring and now a matching wedding band, both cold and heavy. What happens now? Adrian pulled out his phone and started typing. Now we go public. I'll have my assistant release a statement to the press this afternoon. By tonight, everyone will know. And then? And then we prepare for your ex's wedding. Her chest tightened. She'd almost forgotten about Ethan, about the whole reason she'd agreed to this in the first place. It's in 2 weeks, she said quietly. I know. That gives us time to make sure you're ready. He glanced at her. You still want this, don't you? The revenge? She thought about the invitation. About mm, mm, about every moment she'd felt invisible, worthless, disposable. Yes, she said. I want it. Adrian nodded. Then we'll make sure you get it. The car pulled up to the penthouse and they went inside. Adrian disappeared into his office and Lena stood in the middle of the living room, feeling untethered. She was married to a man she barely knew, in a life she didn't recognize. And somewhere, Ethan Cole had no idea what was coming. She woke up the next morning to find her face on page 6. The headline read, Mystery Woman Marries Manhattan's Most Elusive Bachelor. Below it was a photo, her and Adrian leaving City Hall, his hand on her lower back, her face angled slightly away from the camera. She looked expensive, untouchable, nothing like the woman who'd served tables 2 weeks ago. Lena set her phone down and pressed her palms against her eyes. This was what she'd signed up for. This was the plan. But seeing herself reduced to a headline, to gossip fodder, made her stomach turn. Morning. She looked up to find Adrian standing in the doorway of her bedroom, already dressed in a suit, a coffee cup in his hand. He looked at her phone, then at her face. I see you found the news, he said. You could have warned me. Would it have changed anything? She didn't answer. He walked over and handed her the coffee. Black, no sugar, exactly how she'd been drinking it since she moved in. He'd noticed. Of course he had. The statement went live yesterday afternoon, he said. By this morning, every outlet in the city picked it up. My phone's been ringing non-stop. What are people saying? That I've lost my mind, that you're a gold digger, that this is some elaborate publicity stunt. He sat on the edge of her bed, his expression calm. The usual noise. And you're okay with that? I don't care what people say as long as they're saying something. Attention is the goal. You're no longer invisible, Lena. That's what you wanted. She took a sip of coffee and burned her tongue. I didn't think it would feel like this. Like what? Exposed. Adrian studied her for a moment, then stood. Get dressed. We're going out. Where? Brunch. There's a place in the West Village where everyone goes to be seen. We need to make our first public appearance as a couple, and we need to do it before the narrative gets away from us. Her chest tightened. I don't know if I'm ready. You'll never be ready. That's not how this works. You show up, you perform, and eventually it stops feeling like a performance. He paused at the door. 30 minutes. Wear something that doesn't scream new money. He left, and Lena sat there for a long moment, staring at the coffee cup in her hands. Then she got up and went to the closet Margot had filled with enough designer clothing to outfit a small country. She chose a cashmere sweater and soft gray and tailored black pants, paired with ankle boots that cost more than her old rent. She kept her makeup simple, just enough to look polished without trying too hard. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone who could belong in Adrian's world. Almost. The restaurant was tucked into a tree-lined street in the West Village, the kind of place that looked unassuming from the outside, but required a reservation 6 weeks in advance. Adrian's name got them a table immediately, positioned near the window where everyone walking by could see them. Lena sat across from him, acutely aware of the eyes on her. The other diners were trying not to stare, but she could feel their attention like a physical weight. Stop fidgeting, Adrian said quietly, not looking up from his menu. She realized she was twisting her napkin in her lap and forced her hands to still. People are staring. Let them. That's the point. A waiter appeared and Adrian ordered for both of them without asking what she wanted. She should have been annoyed, but she was grateful not to have to speak. When the waiter left, Adrian set his menu aside and looked at her. You're doing it again. Doing what? Shrinking. Trying to disappear. Stop. I don't know how. Sit up straight. Look at me, not the table. When someone stares, stare back. You're not here to apologize for existing, Lena. You're here because you belong. She forced herself to sit taller, to meet his gaze. It felt unnatural, like wearing someone else's skin. Better, he said. Now, tell me about him. Her stomach dropped. Who? The ex. Ethan Cole. You haven't mentioned his name once since we met, but he's the reason you're here. I need to know what I'm dealing with. She looked away, out the window, anywhere but at him. There's nothing to tell. There's always something to tell. The waiter returned with their food, eggs Benedict for her, something green and unidentifiable for him. She picked up her fork, even though she wasn't hungry. We were together for 5 years, she said finally. College sweethearts. He was pre-law, I was studying English. We talked about getting married, having kids, all the normal things people talk about when they're young and stupid. And then? And then he met Victoria Harrington. Old money, right family, everything I wasn't. He broke up with me over coffee. Very civilized, very rational. Told me it wasn't personal, just practical. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. And you believed him. I didn't have a choice. You had every choice. You could have fought for him. You could have made a scene. You could have refused to let him reduce 5 years to a coffee conversation. What would that have accomplished? Nothing, but it would have been honest. He took a bite of his food, chewing slowly. You let him make you small, Lena. You let him convince you that you weren't worth fighting for, and now you're angry about it. She set her fork down, her hands shaking. You don't know anything about it. I know you're sitting here, married to a stranger, because you'd rather rebuild your entire life than admit he was right about you. The words hit like a slap. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Several people turned to look. I need to use the restroom, she said, her voice tight. She walked away before he could respond, weaving through the tables toward the back of the restaurant. In the bathroom, she locked herself in a stall and pressed her hands against the cool tile wall, trying to breathe. He was wrong. He had to be wrong. But a voice in the back of her head whispered that maybe he wasn't. Maybe she had let Ethan make her small. Maybe she'd spent the last 2 years shrinking herself down to nothing because it was easier than admitting she deserved more. She stayed in the stall until her breathing steadied, then came out and washed her hands. Her reflection in the mirror looked calm, composed, nothing like the mess she felt inside. When she returned to the table, Adrian was scrolling through his phone, unbothered. I'm sorry, she said as she sat down. For what? For walking away? Don't apologize. You were angry. That's normal. He set his phone aside. But you need to understand something. I'm not here to coddle you or tell you what you want to hear. I'm here to make you stronger, and sometimes that means saying things you don't want to hear. She picked up her fork again, her appetite still gone. Why do you care if I'm strong or not? This is just a contract. You said so yourself. It's a contract that only works if you can hold up your end. And right now, you're still carrying too much of your past around. It's making you weak. So what am I supposed to do? Just forget about Ethan? Pretend the last 5 years didn't happen? No, you're supposed to use them. Turn the anger into something productive. Stop letting him live in your head rent-free. He leaned forward slightly. In 2 weeks, you're going to walk into his wedding as my wife. You're going to look him in the eye and show him exactly what he lost. But if you go in there still wounded, still looking for his approval, it won't work. You'll just be the girl he left behind, dressed in expensive clothes. She hated that he was right. How do I stop being that girl? She asked quietly. By deciding you're done being her. They finished the meal in silence. When the check came, Adrian paid without looking at it, and they left the restaurant to find a small crowd of photographers waiting outside. Lena froze. Smile, Adrian said under his breath, his hand finding hers. And don't look startled. You knew this was coming. She hadn't actually, but she forced a smile and let him guide her through the flashing cameras, his body blocking hers from the worst of it. They got into the waiting car and the driver pulled away from the curb. That was awful, Lena said, her heart still racing. That was exposure. There's a difference. Adrian scrolled through his phone, already reading the photos people had posted. This is good. You look comfortable. Natural. Like you've been doing this your whole life. She looked at the screen. In the photos, she was smiling, her hand in Adrian's, looking every bit the happy newlywed. It was jarring, seeing herself play a role so convincingly. I don't feel natural, she said. You will. Over the next week, their routine settled into a strange rhythm. Adrian worked from home most days, locked in his office with calls and meetings Lena wasn't privy to. She spent her time reading, exploring the penthouse, trying on the life she'd bought into. Margot came by twice more, drilling her on posture, etiquette, the unspoken rules of high society. A personal trainer showed up and put her through workouts that left her sore and gasping. A nutritionist mapped out meal plans she mostly ignored. It felt like being rebuilt from the ground up. Adrian took her to dinners, gallery openings, a charity gala where she wore a gown that cost more than her old car. Each event was a test, and each time she got a little better at playing the part. She learned to smile at the right moments, to laugh at jokes that weren't funny, to deflect questions she didn't want to answer. But the upcoming wedding loomed over everything. One night, exactly 1 week before Ethan's ceremony, Lena couldn't sleep. She got up and wandered into the living room, surprised to find Adrian sitting on the couch, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Can't sleep either? She asked. He glanced at her. I don't sleep much. She sat down on the opposite end of the couch, pulling her knees to her chest. Why not? Old habit. Too many years of needing to be alert. Alert for what? He took a sip of his drink. Threats, opportunities. The difference between the two isn't always clear. She studied him in the dim light. He looked different without the suit, dressed in a t-shirt and sweatpants, his usual armor stripped away. More human, less untouchable. Can I ask you something? She said. You can ask. I might not answer. Why did you really choose me? And don't say it's because I was desperate or useful. There's something else. He was quiet for a long time, staring into his glass. Then he said, because you reminded me of someone. Who? Myself. A long time ago. He set the glass down. I wasn't always like this, Lena. I didn't grow up in penthouses or wear expensive suits. I grew up poor, angry, with nothing to lose. And I learned that the only way to survive was to become someone people couldn't ignore. She hadn't expected that. What happened to the person you were before? I killed him, slowly, deliberately, until there was nothing left but what you see now. The words hung between them, heavy and raw. Do you regret it? She asked. No. That version of me wouldn't have survived. He was too soft, too willing to believe people when they said things would get better. He looked at her. You're making the same choice now. Killing the old version of yourself. Building something new. It's not easy, but it's necessary. And what if I don't like who I become? Then you'll have to live with it. That's the price. She pulled her knees tighter to her chest. I'm scared. Good. Fear means you're paying attention. They sat in silence for a while, the city lights glittering through the windows. Eventually, Adrian stood. Get some sleep, he said. You'll need it. She watched him disappear into his bedroom, then sat alone in the dark, thinking about the girl she used to be and the woman she was becoming. The week passed too quickly. Before she knew it, it was the night before Ethan's wedding, and Margot was in her room, overseeing the final preparations. This is the most important outfit you'll ever wear, Margot said, unzipping the garment bag with reverence. We need to get it exactly right. The dress inside was stunning, a deep emerald silk that caught the light like water, with a neckline that dipped just low enough to be daring without crossing into inappropriate. It fit Lena like a second skin, hugging every curve. Perfect, Margot breathed. You look like a weapon. Lena stared at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was someone Ethan wouldn't recognize, someone powerful, someone dangerous. Hair up or down? Margot asked. Up. I want him to see my face. Margot smiled. Good girl. They spent the next hour perfecting every detail. Hair swept into an elegant chignon, makeup dramatic but not overdone, jewelry simple and expensive. When Margot finally stepped back, Lena barely recognized herself. Remember, Margot said, you're not going to that wedding to hide. You're going to remind him what he gave up. Own it. After Margot left, Lena stood in front of the mirror for a long time, memorizing the woman she'd become. Then she went to find Adrian. He was in his study, reading something on his laptop. He looked up when she entered, and his expression shifted, just slightly, but enough that she noticed. How do I look? She asked. He stood and walked over, circling her slowly, like someone who doesn't need my help anymore. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. He stopped in front of her. You've changed, Lena. Not just the surface, something deeper. She swallowed hard. Is that a good thing? That depends on what you do with it. He reached out and adjusted the delicate chain around her neck, his fingers brushing her collarbone. Tomorrow, when you walk into that ballroom, you need to remember something. You're not doing this for him. You're doing this for yourself, to prove that you survived, that you're more than what he made you believe. What if I see him and I fall apart? You won't. How do you know? Because you've already survived the worst part. Everything after this is just cleanup. She wanted to believe him. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Tomorrow, she would see Ethan for the first time in 2 years. Tomorrow, she would face the man who'd convinced her she wasn't good enough. Tomorrow, everything would change. She thought about calling it off, running away, disappearing back into the life she'd left behind. But then she thought about the contract she'd signed, the woman she'd become, the man sleeping down the hall who'd given her a second chance, even if his reasons were his own. She couldn't go back now. There was nothing to go back to. Morning came too fast. Lena woke to find a note slipped under her door, Adrian's handwriting, sharp and precise. I'll be ready at 3. Don't be late. She showered, dried her hair, and started the process of becoming Mrs. Adrian Voss. It took 2 hours to get her hair and makeup exactly right, another 30 minutes to get into the dress without wrinkling it. When she emerged from her room, Adrian was waiting in the living room, dressed in a tuxedo that made him look like he'd stepped out of a film. He turned when he heard her heels on the marble floor, and for just a second, something crossed his face that looked almost like approval. Ready? He asked. No. Good answer. He offered his arm. Let's go ruin a wedding. The Plaza Hotel was exactly as ostentatious as she'd imagined. Gold everywhere, crystal chandeliers, marble floors that echoed with every footstep. Guests milled around in expensive clothes, their laughter ringing through the halls. Lena felt her chest tighten as they walked through the lobby, Adrian's hand steady on her back. Breathe, he murmured. You belong here. They found the ballroom where the ceremony would take place. It was already half full, guests finding their seats, murmuring to each other in low voices. Lena scanned the room, looking for Ethan, but he wasn't there yet. Adrian guided her to a seat near the back, close enough to be seen, far enough to make an exit if needed. She sat down, her hands folded in her lap, trying to steady her breathing. He's going to walk down that aisle in about 10 minutes, Adrian said quietly. And when he does, I want you to watch him. Really watch him. See him for what he is, Just a man who made a choice. Not the monster you've built in your head. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The music started. The guests quieted. And then the doors at the front of the ballroom opened. Ethan Cole walked in, and Lena's heart stopped. He looked the same. Older, maybe. A little more polished, but still the same man she'd loved for 5 years. Tall, confident, with that easy smile that had once made her believe anything was possible. He took his place at the altar, his eyes scanning the crowd. And then they landed on her. For a moment, he didn't react, just stared, like he was trying to place her face. And then recognition hit, and his expression shifted. Confusion, disbelief, something that might have been regret. Lena held his gaze, her chin high, her spine straight. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She just stared back, letting him see exactly what he'd lost. Adrian's hand found hers, his fingers lacing through hers with practiced ease. A public display of possession, of partnership. Ethan's eyes dropped to their joined hands, and his jaw tightened. Then the music swelled, and Victoria Harrington appeared at the back of the ballroom in a dress that probably cost 6 figures, and Ethan had to turn away. Lena exhaled slowly, her heart pounding. "Well done," Adrian murmured. The ceremony passed in a blur. Vows were exchanged, rings were placed, and Ethan kissed his bride while the guests applauded. Lena watched it all with a strange detachment, like she was observing someone else's life. When it was over, Adrian stood and helped her to her feet. "Do you want to stay for the reception?" he asked. She looked toward the front of the room, where Ethan was shaking hands and accepting congratulations. He glanced her way once, his expression unreadable. "No," she said. "I'm done here." They walked out of the ballroom together, her hand in his, and Lena didn't look back. Outside, the city was alive with noise and light. Adrian's driver pulled up, and they got into the car in silence. "How do you feel?" Adrian asked as they drove away. Lena thought about it. She'd expected to feel triumphant, vindicated, something sharp and satisfying. But instead, she just felt tired. "Empty," she said finally. "That's normal. Revenge doesn't fill the holes people leave. It just shows you they were never as deep as you thought." She leaned back against the seat, closing her eyes. "So what now? Now you decide what comes next. You've proven your point. You've shown him what he lost. The question is, what do you want for yourself?" She didn't have an answer. When they got back to the penthouse, Adrian poured them both a drink, and they sat on the couch in silence, watching the city lights. "Thank you," Lena said after a while. "For what?" "For giving me this. Even if it was just a contract, even if none of it was real." Adrian looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Who says it wasn't real?" Her breath caught. "What? You think I do this for everyone? Marry strangers, rebuild their lives, sit with them at 3 a.m. when they can't sleep?" He set his glass down. "I chose you for a reason, Lena. And it wasn't just because you were useful." "Then why?" "Because I saw something in you that reminded me of myself. Something worth saving." He stood and walked to the window. "I don't know what this is between us. Partnership, friendship, something else. But it's not nothing." She stood and joined him at the window, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I don't know what it is either," she admitted. "Then I guess we'll figure it out." They stood there together, two people who'd made a deal and found something neither of them expected, and for the first time in weeks, Lena felt like she could breathe. The days after the wedding felt different. Lena woke up that first morning expecting the weight to be gone. The anger, the need to prove herself, all of it lifted now that she'd looked Ethan in the eye and walked away. But instead, she just felt hollow, like she'd been carrying something so long that without it, she didn't know how to stand up straight. She found Adrian in the kitchen, already dressed, reading something on his tablet while his coffee went cold. "Morning," she said. He looked up. "How'd you sleep?" "I didn't really." "That'll pass." He pushed a cup of coffee toward her. Already made, already the way she liked it. "You have plans today?" She almost laughed. Plans. Like she was a person who did things, who had a life beyond waiting for the next event Adrian dragged her to. "No," she said. "Good. We need to talk." Her stomach tightened. Those words never led anywhere good. She sat down across from him, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Adrian set his tablet aside and leaned back in his chair. The wedding's over. You got what you wanted. Now we need to figure out what comes next. What do you mean? I mean, the contract was built around a specific goal, making you visible, giving you the tools to face your ex. We've done that. So the question is, do you want to keep going, or do we start planning an exit strategy? The question landed like a punch. She hadn't thought about leaving, hadn't let herself think about it. I don't know, she said quietly. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. She looked down at her coffee. A month ago, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted, to make Ethan regret everything, to feel like I mattered. But now that I've done it, I don't know what's supposed to come next. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You could go back, get a new apartment, find another job, build the life you would have had if none of this happened. Is that what you want? This isn't about what I want, it's about what you want. She met his eyes. What if I don't want to go back? Something shifted in his expression. Then we renegotiate. Renegotiate what? The terms, the arrangement, all of it. He stood and walked to the window, his hands in his pockets. When I proposed this, I told you it was transactional, a partnership, but it's become more complicated than that, and we both know it. Her pulse quickened. What are you saying? He turned to face her. I'm saying I don't want you to leave. Not yet. Maybe not at all. But if you stay, it needs to be because you want to, not because you're running from something. She stood, her legs unsteady. And if I stay, what does that look like? I don't know. We figure it out as we go. He crossed the room, stopping just in front of her. I'm not good at this, Lena. Relationships, feelings, any of it. I've spent most of my life avoiding anything that looked like attachment. But you've gotten under my skin, and I don't know how to make that go away. Her breath caught. Adrian, don't answer now. Think about it. Take the time you need. But I need to know you're here because you want to be, not because you're afraid of what's waiting for you out there. He left the kitchen, and Lena stood there alone, her heart pounding. She spent the rest of the day walking through the penthouse like a ghost, touching things that didn't belong to her, expensive art, leather-bound books, furniture that cost more than she used to make in a year. This life wasn't hers. It was borrowed, built on a contract and a lie, but it was the only life she had now. By evening, she'd made her decision. She found Adrian in his study, working on something that required his full attention. He didn't look up when she knocked. Can we talk? She asked. He saved whatever he was working on and turned to face her. You've decided. I want to stay. He nodded slowly. Why? Because I don't know who I am without this anymore, and I don't want to go back to being the person I was before. She stepped into the room. But I need to know what this is, what we are, because I can't keep pretending it's just a contract when it doesn't feel like one anymore. Adrian stood and walked over to her. What does it feel like? I don't know, something real, something that scares me. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch careful, deliberate. I'm not good at real, Lena. I don't know how to do this without breaking it. Then we'll break it together. He kissed her then, and it wasn't like the perfunctory kiss at City Hall or the practiced touches in public. It was raw, desperate, the kind of kiss that felt like falling and catching yourself at the same time. When they pulled apart, she was breathing hard, her hands fisted in his shirt. This complicates things, he said. I know. We'll have to rewrite the rules. I know. He smiled, barely, just a slight curve of his mouth. Then let's start now. They rewrote the rules that night. Not on paper, not with lawyers, but in the quiet moments between words. They talked about what they wanted, what they feared, what it meant to build something real out of something that had started as a lie. Adrian told her things he'd never told anyone, about the childhood he'd escaped, the people he'd hurt to get where he was, the loneliness that came with always being 10 steps ahead of everyone else. Lena told him about the years she'd spent making herself smaller, the way Ethan's voice still lived in her head sometimes, telling her she wasn't enough, about the fear that even now, dressed in expensive clothes and living in a penthouse, she was still just pretending. You're not pretending, Adrian said. You've become someone new. That's not the same thing. How do you know? Because I did the same thing. I know what it looks like. They fell asleep on the couch that night, her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. It was the first time she'd slept through the night since the wedding. The next few weeks settled into something that almost felt normal. Adrian still worked impossible hours, still disappeared into his office for days at a time. But when he emerged, he sought her out. They had dinner together, talked about nothing and everything, learned how to exist in the same space without the performance. Lena started looking for things to do with her time. She couldn't just be Mrs. Voss forever, drifting through a life she hadn't built. She needed something that was hers. One afternoon, she was reading in the living room when Adrian came in, his expression thoughtful. "I have an idea," he said. She set her book aside. "Should I be worried?" "Probably." He sat down next to her. "You mentioned wanting to do something with your time, something that matters." "Yeah. I have a foundation, started it years ago as a tax write-off mostly. It funds education programs for kids who can't afford college. But I've been too busy to give it the attention it needs. I want you to run it." She stared at him. "What?" "You'd be good at it. You're smart, you understand what it's like to struggle, and you care about things. That's more than most people in this world can say." "I don't know anything about running a foundation." "You'll learn. I'll get you the best people, set you up with everything you need. But it'll be yours. Your project. Your legacy." Her throat tightened. "Why would you do that?" "Because you need a reason to stay that isn't me, and because I think you'd be good at it." She looked down at her hands. "I don't know if I can do this." "You can. You just have to decide you want to." She thought about it for a long time. Then she said, "Okay, I'll try." Adrian smiled, a real smile, not the practiced one he wore in public. "Good. We'll start next week." Running the foundation turned out to be harder than she'd expected. There were budgets to review, proposals to read, meetings with people who had decades more experience than she did. She felt like a fraud most days, sitting in boardrooms and making decisions that affected people's lives. But slowly, she started to find her footing. She learned to ask the right questions, to trust her instincts, to push back when something didn't feel right. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she was building something that mattered. One evening, she came home from a site visit to one of the schools the foundation funded. She was exhausted, her feet aching from walking through classrooms and talking to students, but she was smiling. Adrian was in the kitchen, cooking, something he did when he needed to think. He looked up when she came in. "Good day?" he asked. "Long day, but yeah, good." She kicked off her shoes and sat at the counter. "I met this girl today. 16, brilliant, wants to study engineering. Her family can't afford it, but we're going to make it happen. She cried when I told her." Adrian set down the knife he was using and looked at her. "You did that." "The foundation did that." "No, you did. You're the one making it happen." He came around the counter and kissed her forehead. "I'm proud of you." The words hit harder than she expected. She blinked back tears and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing something in me I didn't see in myself." He held her tighter. "I told you, you were always capable of this. You just needed someone to believe it." But not everything was easy. There were nights when the weight of the lie they'd built caught up with her. Nights when she wondered what would happen if people found out the truth, that their marriage had started as a contract, that she'd only become Mrs. Voss because she wanted revenge on a man who'd forgotten her the moment she left. There were moments when she caught Adrian watching her with an expression she couldn't read, and she wondered if he regretted this, regretted letting her in, letting things get complicated. And there were still days when Ethan's voice crept into her head, telling her she was a fraud, that she didn't belong in this world, that eventually everyone would see through her. One night, about 2 months after the wedding, Lena woke up in a cold sweat, her heart racing. She'd been dreaming about the plaza, about walking down that aisle and finding the room empty except for Ethan, laughing at her. She got out of bed and went to the kitchen for water. Adrian was already there, standing by the window with a glass of whiskey. "Can't sleep?" he asked without turning around. "Bad dream." He turned to face her. "About him?" She nodded. Adrian set his glass down and walked over to her. "He's still in your head." "I know. I'm trying to get him out." "Trying isn't enough. You need to let him go, Lena, completely. or he'll always have power over you. I don't know how. He cupped her face in his hands. By choosing to be here. By choosing me. By choosing the life we're building. Not because you're running from him, but because it's what you actually want. What if I can't do that? Then we'll have a problem. His voice was gentle, but there was steel underneath. Because I can't compete with a ghost, Lena. I won't. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. I don't want him anymore. I swear I don't. Then prove it. To yourself, not to me. She didn't know how to do that, but she knew Adrian was right. Ethan had taken enough from her. She couldn't let him take this too. The turning point came 3 months after the wedding. Lena was at a charity gala with Adrian, one of the endless events they were expected to attend. She was talking to a donor about the foundation when she saw him across the room. Ethan Cole. He was with Victoria, her hand tucked into his elbow, both of them smiling at something someone had said. Lena's first instinct was to leave, to disappear before he saw her. But then she remembered Adrian's words. Choose to be here. She excused herself from the conversation and walked straight toward him. Adrian was across the room, deep in conversation with someone. But she felt his eyes on her as she moved. Ethan, she said when she reached him. He turned, and the surprise on his face was immediate. Lena, I didn't know you'd be here. Why would you? We don't exactly run in the same circles anymore. She smiled, cool and composed. Victoria, it's good to see you again. Victoria's smile was tight. You too. There was an awkward pause. Then Ethan said, I saw the photos. From the wedding. You and Adrian Voss. That was unexpected. Life's full of surprises. I didn't even know you knew him. There's a lot you don't know about me, Ethan. There always was. His jaw tightened. Lena, I'm not here to rehash the past, she said, her voice steady. I just wanted to say hello. Congratulations on the marriage. I hope you're happy. She turned to walk away, but his voice stopped her. Are you? Happy? She looked back at him. Yeah, I am. And the thing was, she meant it. She walked back to Adrian, who was watching her with a mixture of concern and something that might have been pride. You okay? He asked quietly. Yeah, I'm good. What did you say to him? That I'm happy. Adrian's hand found hers. Are you? She looked up at him. This man who'd taken a broken, angry woman and helped her become someone she actually liked. This man who'd given her a second chance, even if his reasons had been selfish at first. Yeah, she said, I am. He kissed her then, right there in the middle of the gala, in front of everyone. It wasn't for show. It was real. And when they pulled apart, Lena realized something had shifted. The ghost of Ethan Cole, the one that had haunted her for 2 years, was finally, blessedly quiet. Over the next few weeks, things between her and Adrian deepened. They stopped sleeping in separate rooms. They stopped pretending the marriage was just a contract. They built something that looked like a real relationship, messy and imperfect and sometimes frustrating, but real. They fought sometimes. Adrian had a tendency to shut down when things got too emotional, and Lena had a habit of pushing when she should have given him space. But they learned to navigate each other's edges, to give and take in ways neither of them had done before. The foundation grew. Lena hired a team, expanded their programs, started making real, tangible differences in kids' lives. She found herself waking up excited about the work, about the future, about the life she was building, and slowly the fear that she was still pretending started to fade. One night, about 4 months into their marriage, Adrian came home late from a meeting. Lena was already in bed reading when he walked in. Hey, she said, setting her book aside. Hey. He sat on the edge of the bed and ran a hand through his hair. He looked exhausted. Rough day? Long day. Too many idiots in one room. She smiled. Want to talk about it? Not really. He looked at her. I just want to be here. With you. He took off his suit jacket and tie, kicked off his shoes, and climbed into bed beside her. She curled against him, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Can I ask you something? She said after a while. Always. When you first offered me this deal, did you think it would turn into this? He was quiet for a moment. No, I thought it would be clean, simple. You'd get what you needed, I'd get what I needed, and we'd part ways after a year or two. And now? Now I don't want you to leave. Ever. His arm tightened around her. I know that's not what we agreed to. I know this probably wasn't what you signed up for. But I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. Her throat tightened. Good, because I can't imagine my life without you either. He tilted her chin up and kissed her, slow and deep, and Lena felt the last piece of the wall she'd been holding on to crumble. This was real. This was her life. Not a performance, not a lie, not something borrowed. Hers. The next morning, she woke up to find Adrian already awake, watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. What? She asked, her voice still rough with sleep. Nothing, just thinking. About what? About how I don't deserve you, but I'm not giving you back. She laughed and hit him with a pillow. You're such a sap. Only for you. They spent the morning in bed, talking and laughing and being the kind of couple Lena had never thought she'd get to be. And when they finally got up, Adrian pulled her into the kitchen and made her breakfast. Badly, because he couldn't cook to save his life. And they ate burned toast and laughed about it. Later that week, Lena was at the foundation office when her assistant told her someone was there to see her. Who? She asked. She didn't give a name, just said it was personal. Lena frowned and went to the lobby. Standing there, looking uncomfortable and out of place, was Victoria Harrington Cole. Victoria, Lena said, surprised. What are you doing here? Victoria twisted her hands together. Can we talk? Somewhere private? Lena led her to a conference room and closed the door. They sat across from each other, the silence stretching. I don't really know how to say this, Victoria started. So I'm just going to say it. I made a mistake. Lena blinked. What? Marrying Ethan. It was a mistake. Victoria's eyes were red like she'd been crying. He talks about you. All the time. About how different things would be if he'd made different choices. And I realized I'm not the person he wants. I'm just the person he was supposed to want. Lena didn't know what to say. I saw you at the gala, Victoria continued, with your husband, and you looked so happy, so sure of yourself. And I realized I've never felt that way. Not once. Victoria, I'm not here to ask for advice. I just needed to tell someone. And I thought maybe you'd understand. Lena looked at this woman, this perfect, polished woman who had everything Lena once thought she wanted, and she felt nothing but pity. I do understand, Lena said quietly. I spent 5 years trying to be what Ethan wanted, and it was never enough. Because the problem wasn't me, it was him. He doesn't know what he wants, Victoria, and he never will. Victoria wiped her eyes. How did you move on? I stopped waiting for him to see my value. I found it myself. They talked for another hour, and when Victoria left, Lena felt lighter, like she'd closed a chapter she didn't even know was still open. That night, she told Adrian about the conversation. He listened, his expression thoughtful. Do you feel bad for her? He asked. A little. She's trapped in the same cage I was. But you got out, because you gave me the key. He pulled her into his lap. No, you unlocked it yourself. I just held the door open. She kissed him, and in that moment, Lena realized she'd finally stopped running from her past. She'd built a future worth staying for. 6 months into their marriage, Lena stopped counting the days. She'd started doing it in the beginning, marking time like a prisoner waiting for release. Like this was all temporary, and one morning she'd wake up back in her old studio with greasy hair and nothing in the fridge. But somewhere along the way, the counting stopped mattering. The penthouse became home. Adrian became hers. The foundation became the thing she thought about when she woke up and the last thing on her mind before sleep. She wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. She was just living. But life had a way of testing you right when you got comfortable. It was a Thursday afternoon when Adrian's lawyer called. Lena was in the foundation office reviewing grant applications when her phone buzzed. Adrian's name on the screen. Hey, she answered. What's up? We need to talk. Can you come home? Something in his voice made her stomach drop. What's wrong? Just come home, Lena. She made an excuse to her assistant and left, her heart pounding the entire ride back to Tribeca. When she walked into the penthouse, Adrian was standing by the window, his posture rigid. What happened? She asked. He turned to face her. Someone's asking questions about us, about how we met, when we actually got married, whether this whole thing is real. Her blood went cold. Who? A journalist. Freelance, but she's got connections. She's been digging, talking to people from your old restaurant, people who knew you before. She knows something's off. Lena sat down hard on the couch. What does she know? She knows we got married fast. She knows you went from working double shifts to running a foundation overnight. She's putting pieces together, and if she keeps digging, she's going to find the contract. Can we stop her? I can try. Money usually works, but if she's the type who cares more about the story than the payout, we have a problem. Lena pressed her hands to her face. This was it. The thing she'd been afraid of from the beginning. The lie catching up with them, the whole carefully constructed life crumbling. What do we do? She asked quietly. Adrian crossed the room and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. We have two options. We can fight it. Deny everything, bury her in legal threats, make it too expensive for her to publish, or what? Or we get ahead of it. We tell the truth. On our terms. She stared at him. You want to tell people this started as a contract? I want to tell them it started as a lot of things. A business arrangement, a partnership. And then it became something real, which is the truth, Lena. The contract was just the beginning. Everything that came after, that's real. People won't see it that way. They'll think we lied to them. We did lie to them, but we can control the narrative. We can make it a story about two broken people finding each other in an unconventional way. People love that stuff. She pulled her hands away and stood, pacing the room. This is insane. If we admit the truth, the foundation loses credibility. Donors will pull out. Everything I've built will survive because you've done good work, real work. The foundation isn't built on our marriage, Lena. It's built on what you've accomplished. You don't know that. I do, because I've watched you. You're not a fraud. You've earned every bit of respect you've gotten. She wanted to believe him, but the fear was louder than his certainty. I need to think, she said. We don't have a lot of time. She's planning to publish next week. Then I'll think fast. She spent the rest of the day alone, walking through the city like she used to when she first moved here. Aimless, trying to find answers in the rhythm of her feet on pavement. She thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, desperate and angry, willing to sign her life away for a chance at revenge. She thought about the woman she'd become, someone who actually liked the person she saw in the mirror. And she thought about Adrian, about the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, about the quiet mornings and the late-night conversations, about the way he'd held her when she cried about a student who didn't get into their first-choice school, like it mattered to him because it mattered to her. This wasn't fake. Whatever it had started as, it wasn't fake anymore. By the time she got home, it was dark. Adrian was in his study, nursing a whiskey and staring at his computer screen. I know what I want to do, she said from the doorway. He looked up. Tell me. I want to tell the truth. All of it. His expression shifted. You're sure? No, I'm terrified, but I'm tired of being afraid that someone's going to figure out I don't belong here. I want to stop running from who I was, and I think the only way to do that is to own it. Adrian stood and crossed to her, cupping her face in his hands. You're braver than you think. Or stupider. That too. He kissed her forehead. We'll do it together, whatever happens. They spent the next 3 days crafting a statement with Adrian's PR team. It was honest, painfully so. They explained how they'd met, the arrangement they'd made, the reasons behind it. But they also talked about what came after, about falling in love in the middle of a contract, about building something real out of something that started as performance. The statement went live on a Monday morning. Lena didn't look at social media, didn't read the comments or the think pieces or the hot takes. Adrian's assistant fielded the calls, the interview requests, the people who wanted to dissect their marriage for clicks and outrage. But the foundation's phone rang too. And for the first few hours, Lena was convinced it would be donors pulling their funding, board members resigning, everything falling apart. Instead, the first call was from one of their biggest donors. I just read the statement, the woman said, and I wanted to tell you, I think it's the bravest thing I've seen in years. Lena almost dropped the phone. You do? Absolutely. You could have hidden behind lawyers and PR spin. Instead, you told the truth. That takes guts. The Foundation's work speaks for itself, Lena. This doesn't change that. More calls came. Some were supportive, some were judgmental. A few board members did resign, citing concerns about the Foundation's image. But the majority were people saying they respected the honesty, that they'd rather work with someone who admitted their mistakes than someone who pretended to be perfect. By the end of the week, the Foundation hadn't lost a single major donor. If anything, they'd gained attention. Applications for their programs doubled. Media outlets wanted to interview Lena about second chances, about building a life from scratch, about what it meant to choose love over pride. She did a few interviews, sat across from journalists and told them the same thing. She wasn't perfect. She'd made choices out of anger and desperation, but she'd also worked to become someone better. And she wasn't ashamed of where she'd started anymore. One interviewer asked her, "Do you think you would have found this version of yourself without Adrian Voss?" Lena thought about it. "I don't know. Maybe eventually. But he gave me a shortcut. He saw something in me I didn't see in myself, and that's a gift, even if it came wrapped in a contract." The interview went viral. People loved the honesty, the messiness, the idea that you could make selfish choices and still end up somewhere good. But not everyone was happy. Ethan called 2 weeks after the statement went public. Lena was at home when her phone rang, his name flashing on the screen. She stared at it for a long moment, then answered. "Lena," he said, and his voice sounded strained. "I saw the news." "Yeah, everyone did." "I can't believe you did that. Admitting the whole thing was fake." "It wasn't fake, Ethan. It started as an arrangement, but it became real. That's the whole point. You married him for revenge, against me." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "You really think you're that important? I married him because I needed a way out of a life that was killing me. You were just part of the equation. But you know what? You stopped mattering the second I signed that contract." Lena, I'm not the girl you left, Ethan. I'm not the girl who waited around for you to decide I was good enough. I'm someone else now, someone better. And you don't get to have an opinion about it. I made a mistake. Leaving you. I see that now." She closed her eyes. "No, you didn't. You made the choice that was right for you at the time. And I'm grateful. Because if you hadn't left, I never would have found this. I never would have found him." "You're really happy? With Voss?" "Yeah, I am." There was a long silence. Then Ethan said, "I hope that's true." "It is. And I hope you figure out what you actually want, Ethan, because it's not me. It never was." She hung up before he could respond. Adrian was in the kitchen when she found him, chopping vegetables with the focused intensity he brought to everything. "Ethan called," she said. His knife stilled. "What did he want?" "To tell me he made a mistake, that he should have stayed with me." Adrian set the knife down and turned to face her. "And?" "And I told him I was glad he didn't, because I wouldn't have this if he'd stayed." Something softened in Adrian's expression. "You mean that?" "Yeah, I do." She walked over and wrapped her arms around his waist. "I used to think I needed him to regret leaving, that his regret would somehow validate all the pain. But it doesn't. It doesn't change anything. I'm happy without his approval." Adrian held her tight. "I'm proud of you." "For what?" "For choosing this. For choosing us. For being brave enough to burn down the old version of yourself and build something new." She pulled back to look at him. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You could have. It just would have taken longer." He kissed her, soft and slow. "But I'm glad you didn't have to." The Foundation continued to grow. Within a year, they'd expanded to 3 more cities, funded scholarships for over 200 students, and partnered with schools across the country. Lena hired a team she trusted, delegated the parts of the work she wasn't good at, and focused on the parts that made her come alive, meeting students, hearing their stories, watching them transform. She realized, somewhere in the middle of all of it, that this was what she'd been looking for her whole life. Not revenge. Not validation from someone who didn't see her, but purpose. The feeling that she mattered, not because of who she was married to or what she looked like, but because of what she did. Adrian watched her bloom into this version of herself with something that looked like awe. He started coming home earlier, making time for dinners and weekend trips, and quiet mornings where they didn't talk about work or strategy or the next event they had to attend. One Saturday, about a year and a half into their marriage, he woke her up early. "Get dressed," he said. "We're going somewhere." "Where?" "You'll see." She grumbled but got up, throwing on jeans and a sweater. They drove out of the city, the skyline shrinking behind them, until they reached a small town about 2 hours north. Adrian pulled up to a house, modest, charming, with a wraparound porch and a yard full of trees. "What is this?" Lena asked. "Somewhere we can go when the city gets too loud. I bought it last month. I wanted to surprise you." She got out of the car and walked up to the porch, taking in the details. It was nothing like the penthouse, no glass, no marble, no expensive art, just a house that felt like a home. "You bought this for us?" she asked. "For you, so you'd have a place that's just yours. No galas, no cameras, no performance, just space to breathe." She turned to him, tears burning in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just use it. Bring students here for retreats. Come here when you need to think. Make it whatever you need it to be." She kissed him, hard and grateful, and for the first time in her life, Lena felt like she had everything she needed. But even with all the progress, there were still hard days. Days when the old voices crept back in, telling her she was a fraud, that she didn't deserve any of this. Days when she looked at the foundation's budget and felt the weight of all those students counting on her. Days when she and Adrian fought, really fought, the kind of arguments where they said things they regretted. One particularly bad fight happened on a Tuesday night, about 3 months after Adrian bought the house. Lena had made a decision about the foundation without consulting him, hired a new director for their West Coast operations, someone Adrian thought was too inexperienced. "You should have talked to me first," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "Why? It's my foundation. You said so yourself. And I fund it. That gives me a say." "So that's what this is about? Money? Control?" "It's about partnership, Lena, something we're supposed to be doing together. We are partners, but I don't need your permission to make every decision. I'm not your employee." "I never said you were." "Then stop treating me like one." He stared at her, jaw clenched. "You know what? Do whatever you want. I'm done trying to help." He grabbed his coat and left, the door slamming behind him. Lena stood in the middle of the living room, shaking with anger and something that felt like fear. She'd pushed too hard, said too much. And now he was gone, and she didn't know if he was coming back. She spent the next 2 hours pacing, replaying the fight, wondering if this was it, if this was the moment everything fell apart. But then she heard his key in the lock, and he walked in, looking tired. "I'm sorry," he said before she could speak. "You were right. It's your foundation. You don't need my approval for every hire. I worry about you taking on too much, burning out." She walked over to him. "And I'm sorry for snapping. You're not controlling. You're protective. There's a difference. I'm still learning how to let people care about me without feeling like I'm losing myself." He pulled her into his arms. "We're both still learning. That's okay." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, and Lena understood that this was what real love looked like. Not perfect, not easy, just two imperfect people choosing each other, even when it was hard. 2 years into their marriage, the foundation held its first annual gala. Lena stood on the stage in a room full of donors, students, and people who'd helped build something that mattered, and she told her story. Not the sanitized version, the real one. She talked about being broke and invisible, about the invitation that broke her, about the contract she'd signed out of desperation and anger, about the man who'd seen something in her she couldn't see in herself, about falling in love in the middle of a lie and choosing to make it real. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you I'm proud of every choice I made," she said, "because I'm not. I made a lot of them for the wrong reasons, but I'm proud of where those choices led me. I'm proud of the work we're doing here, and I'm proud of the woman I've become." The room erupted in applause, students cried, donors pledged more money, and Adrian, standing in the back of the room, smiled at her like she'd just given him the world. After the gala, they went home and collapsed on the couch, exhausted and happy. "That was incredible," Adrian said. "You were incredible." "I was terrified the whole time." "You didn't show it." She curled into his side, her head on his chest. "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "The contract, the one we signed at the beginning. It had an end date, 2 years. He stiffened slightly. It did. We're past that now. We are. She sat up to look at him. So what are we doing? Are we still operating under those terms, or are we writing new ones? Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I don't want terms anymore. I don't want contracts or conditions or escape clauses. I just want you. For as long as you'll have me. Her throat tightened. You mean that? I've never meant anything more. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. I know this started as a transaction, but it stopped being that a long time ago. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, Lena, and I don't want to lose you. You won't. I'm not going anywhere. He kissed her, and in that kiss was everything they'd built. The partnership, the love, the messy, imperfect reality of two broken people choosing each other every single day. 3 years into their marriage, Lena got a letter. It was from Victoria Harrington. No longer Victoria Cole, she'd filed for divorce 6 months earlier, and the papers had just been finalized. The letter was short. Lena, I wanted to thank you for what you said that day at your office, for showing me it was possible to choose yourself. I left Ethan 3 months ago. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most necessary. I'm still figuring out what that looks like for me, but I'm trying. I hope you're still happy. You deserve it, Victoria. Lena showed the letter to Adrian that night. He read it, then set it aside. How do you feel? He asked. I don't know. Sad for her, I think, but also glad she's trying. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Ethan hadn't left you? She thought about it. Sometimes, but not in a sad way. More like, I'm grateful it happened, because I wouldn't have this otherwise. You think you would have stayed with him if he'd asked? Probably. I was so desperate to be chosen that I would have said yes to anything. She looked at Adrian. But that's not who I am anymore. I don't need someone to choose me to know I'm worth choosing. He pulled her into his lap. Good, because I'm keeping you anyway. She laughed and kissed him, and for the first time in her life, Lena understood what it meant to be whole. Not because someone else completed her, but because she'd done the work to complete herself. Adrian had given her the tools, the opportunity, the push she needed. But the transformation, that was hers. The foundation kept expanding. By year 4, they were in 8 states, had helped over 500 students, and Lena had been featured in magazines, podcasts, speaking circuits. She wrote a book, not a memoir exactly, but a collection of essays about second chances, about building a life from scratch, about what it meant to choose yourself when the world had written you off. The book became a bestseller, not because it had all the answers, but because it was honest about the questions, about the fear and the doubt and the days when she still felt like a fraud, about the fights with Adrian, the mistakes she'd made, the students she couldn't help no matter how hard she tried. People connected with that honesty. They wrote her letters, shared their own stories, told her she'd given them permission to start over. And Lena realized that this connection, this impact, was worth more than any revenge she could have planned. Ethan Cole had done her the greatest favor of her life when he walked away. He'd freed her to become someone she actually wanted to be. One afternoon, almost 5 years after she'd signed that contract, Lena was at the upstate house, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea. Adrian was inside, on a call with someone in London. The trees were starting to change color, gold and red creeping into the green. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello? Lena? It's Ethan. She hadn't heard his voice in over a year. The last time they'd spoken, he'd been trying to convince her he'd made a mistake. She'd hung up on him. What do you want? She asked, her voice flat. I heard about the book. I read it. Okay. And I wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything, for making you feel like you weren't enough, for choosing the easy path instead of the right one, for all of it. Lena took a sip of her tea, letting the silence stretch. Then she said, I appreciate that, but I don't need your apology, Ethan. I know, I just needed to say it. Why now? What changed? He was quiet for a moment. Victoria left me, and I realized I've spent my whole life making decisions based on what other people expect, what my family expects, what looks good on paper. And I've never once asked myself what I actually want. That sounds hard. It is. But reading your book, seeing how you rebuilt your life, I don't know. It made me think maybe I could too. Lena looked out at the trees, at the peaceful life she'd built. You can, but you have to want it for yourself, not because you're trying to prove something to someone else. I know. And Ethan, I forgive you. Not because you asked, but because holding on to it doesn't serve me anymore. You did what you thought was right. It hurt like hell, but it also set me free. So, thank you. And good luck. She hung up before he could respond. Adrian came out onto the porch a few minutes later, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Who was that? He asked. Ethan, calling to apologize. And I told him I forgive him, because I do. Adrian sat down beside her. You're a better person than I am. No, I just learned that holding on to anger only hurts the person carrying it, and I'm done carrying things that don't belong to me. He kissed her temple. I love you. I love you too. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun move through the trees, and Lena thought about how strange life was, how the worst thing that ever happened to her had led to the best thing, how a wedding invitation meant to humiliate her had become the catalyst for everything good in her life. She thought about the girl she'd been, standing in that cramped studio apartment, feeling worthless and invisible. If she could go back and tell that girl what was coming, the contract, the transformation, the love, the purpose, she wouldn't believe it. But maybe that was the point. You couldn't see the good things coming when you were in the middle of the pain. You just had to trust that the pain had a purpose, even if you couldn't see it yet. A year later, Lena and Adrian stood in front of a different kind of crowd. Not donors or journalists or people looking for a story. Just family and close friends, the real ones, the ones who'd watched them fall apart and put themselves back together. They were renewing their vows, not because the first ones didn't count, but because they wanted to say them again. This time without the contract, without the performance, without anything except the truth. Lena wore a simple white dress, nothing like the designer gown she'd worn to Ethan's wedding. Adrian wore a suit, but he'd left the tie at home. They stood under the trees at the upstate house, holding hands. I didn't know what I was getting when I married you, Adrian said. I thought I was making a business deal, hiring someone to play a part. But you turned out to be so much more than that. You challenged me, changed me, made me believe in things I'd stopped believing in a long time ago, and I'm grateful, every single day. Lena's eyes filled with tears. I married you because I was angry and desperate and looking for a way out. But I stayed because you saw me when I was invisible, because you gave me a chance to become someone I actually liked, and because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you, the real you, not the performance, just you. They exchanged new rings, simple gold bands they'd picked out together, and when the officiant told them they could kiss, Adrian pulled her close and whispered, "Thank you." For what? For taking a chance on a stranger. Thank you for taking a chance on me. They kissed and their friends cheered, and for the first time since this whole thing started, Lena felt like she could breathe, really breathe, without fear or doubt or the weight of who she used to be. She was just Lena Voss, not Ethan's ex, not the girl from the restaurant, not someone playing a part, just herself. And that was enough. The party lasted late into the night, music and laughter and toasts that made everyone cry. Lena danced with Adrian under the stars, her head on his shoulder, swaying to a song she didn't know the words to. What are you thinking about? He asked. How different my life is from what I thought it would be. Good different or bad different? Good. So good it scares me sometimes. Why does it scare you? Because I keep waiting for it to fall apart, for someone to realize I don't belong here. He pulled back to look at her. You built this, Lena. The foundation, this life. Us. You belong here because you made it yours, and nobody can take that away from you. She knew he was right, but the fear was still there, lurking in the background. Maybe it always would be. Maybe that was part of being human, carrying the fear even when you didn't need it anymore. But she was learning to live with it, to acknowledge it, and keep moving anyway. The foundation hit a major milestone in year 6, 1,000 students funded across 12 states. Lena stood in front of a room full of those students, watching them graduate, and she couldn't stop crying. These kids, most of them from backgrounds like hers, struggling and scared and convinced they didn't matter, were walking across that stage because someone had believed in them. And she'd been part of that. She'd helped build something that changed lives. Adrian was in the audience, filming on his phone, even though she'd told him not to. When she sat down next to him after her speech, he showed her the video. "You're going to want this someday," he said. "Why?" "Because in 20 years, when you've helped 10,000 kids, you're going to want to remember what it felt like when it was just 1,000. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you. I love you too." They went home that night and made dinner together, something they did most nights now, a small ritual that kept them grounded. Adrian was still terrible at cooking, but he tried, and that was what mattered. While they ate, Lena's phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Hi, Lena. This is Victoria. I know we haven't talked in a while, but I wanted to tell you I'm engaged to someone who actually sees me, and I wanted to say thank you for showing me it was possible. I hope you're well." Lena showed Adrian the message. He smiled. "Are you going to respond?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm happy for her." She typed back a quick message. "Congratulations. I'm so glad you found what you were looking for," and set her phone down. "Do you ever think about him?" Adrian asked. "Ethan? Not really. Sometimes I forget he exists." She took a sip of wine. "Is that bad?" "No, that's healing." And it was. Somewhere along the way, Ethan Cole had stopped being the villain in her story. He was just a guy who'd made a choice that hurt her at the time but also set her free. She didn't need his regret. She didn't need his apology. She didn't need anything from him at all. She had everything she needed right here. 7 years after signing that contract, Lena stood in the house upstate, watching the sun set through the trees. The foundation was thriving. She and Adrian had found a rhythm that worked: independence and partnership, space and closeness, honesty even when it hurt. They fought sometimes, about work, about priorities, about the fact that Adrian still had a tendency to make decisions without consulting her, and she still had a habit of taking on too much. But they fought fair, and they always came back to each other. She heard his car pull up and smiled. He'd been in the city for meetings all day, but he'd driven up to spend the weekend with her. He found her on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sky turn pink and gold. "Hey," he said, sitting down beside her. "Hey yourself?" He handed her a mug of tea, chamomile, the way she liked it at night. "Productive day?" "Yeah, we just got approval for the expansion into the Midwest, 3 more states." "That's incredible." "It is." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I've been thinking about something." "Should I be worried?" "Maybe." She smiled. "I want to write another book, not about the foundation this time, about us, about how 2 broken people can build something real." "You think people would want to read it?" "I think people need to know that perfect love stories don't exist, that real love is messy and hard and worth it anyway." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to tell them about the contract?" "Yeah, all of it. The good, the bad, the parts that still make me uncomfortable." "Why?" "Because I'm tired of pretending I got here by being perfect. I got here by being desperate and angry and willing to take a chance on something crazy. And maybe someone else needs to hear that. Maybe someone else needs permission to start over, even if they don't know where they're going." He kissed her temple. "Then write it. Tell the truth. You're good at that." She turned to look at him. "You know I couldn't have done any of this without you, right?" "I know you could have. It just would have taken longer." "Still, thank you. For seeing me when I was invisible. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. For loving me even when I was hard to love. You made it easy." He pulled her closer. "And I'd do it all again. Every bit of it." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars come out one by one, and Lena thought about the invitation that had started all of this. The cream cardstock with gold lettering, the name of a man who'd made her feel worthless. She'd burned it years ago, watching it curl and blacken in the fireplace. And with it, she'd burned the last piece of the girl who'd needed his approval to feel whole. She didn't need it anymore. She didn't need anyone's approval but her own. And that realization that she was enough exactly as she was worth more than any revenge she could have planned. Because the truth was, Ethan Cole hadn't destroyed her when he left. He'd freed her, given her the chance to become someone she actually liked, someone who mattered, Someone who built things instead of waiting for them to happen. She'd spent so long thinking she needed to prove something to him, to show him what he'd lost. But in the end, the only person she'd needed to prove anything to was herself. And she had. She'd proven she was capable, strong, worth loving, worth choosing, not because Adrian had chosen her, but because she'd chosen herself. Every single day, even on the days when it was hard. That was the real transformation. Not the clothes or the money or the foundation or the man who loved her, just the simple, quiet knowledge that she mattered, that she always had. She just hadn't been able to see it until she stopped looking for validation in all the wrong places. "I love you," she said quietly. Adrian's arm tightened around her. "I love you too." And in the quiet of that moment, wrapped in a blanket on a porch in a house they'd built together, Lena realized she'd found what she'd been searching for all along. Not revenge, not validation, not even love, though she'd found that too. She'd found herself. The real version, the strong version, the version that didn't apologize for existing or shrink to make other people comfortable or wait for permission to take up space. And that version of herself, flawed and messy and still learning, was someone worth being. She'd become the woman she needed all along. And nothing, not Ethan's regret, not the journalist's questions, not the doubt that still crept in on hard days, could take that away from her. Because this life, this love, this purpose, it was hers. Built by her own hands, her own choices, her own refusal to stay broken. And that was the greatest revenge of all. Not against Ethan, against every voice that had ever told her she wasn't enough. She was enough. She always had been. She just needed to believe it.